Hey guys, Sebastian here, going over the May 24th Cardano technical report. I'm going to stick with the same format as last week's. It seems like a lot of people like it. So first we're going to go over the port, and then we're going to go into more technical details and go over the pull requests and the GitHub and all that kind of stuff. Alright, so first of all, they said they finished the 1.2 release. The 1.2 release has been put out. Hopefully you guys have all gotten it so far. If you haven't, your client should auto-update within 12 hours. If it doesn't for any reason, or I believe if you're using the Linux client, I'm not sure if it auto-updates, you can always go to the Daedalus website and download it manually, and that should work also. Next up, they're talking about recovery options for people who received ADA vouchers during the ICO. So if you received a voucher during the ICO, and you need to recover your account, there's now a new option in the wallet as of the 1.2 release, I believe. There'll be recovery regular and recovery force vended, depending on which case you were in. If you were in the ICO, you'll probably know which case you ended up in. And lastly, they're talking about changing the React Polymorph library. We've talked about this in the past. This is just the library they use for handling the UI in Daedalus. Alright, so going to the wallet backend, they've been working on the TLS change some more, and mostly what they're doing now is just gluing the pieces. So they had the TLS implementation on the Cardano SL side, and they added the implementation to the Daedalus side. They added some auto regeneration of the certificates if they ever for some reason disappear. And now I think the last thing they're doing is adding a certificate generation utility for people who need to generate their own custom certificate. So that's still in the work, and hopefully that'll be in the next release. Next up, they're talking about the wallet specification. So a few different things. One of them is trying to figure out how to handle a key value store for transaction metadata. So we saw in previous reports, they're handling metadata for transactions, and they had two kinds of metadata. The metadata associated with the blockchain, that's to say it depends on the state of the blockchain in some way, but like a previous block cache, stuff like that. And they had metadata related to transaction that's supposed to be like a pure, does not depend on any of the other variables metadata. And so they did the implementation for that, and now they're looking for a way to store in a persistent way this data. I think in the past they looked into SQL database of some sort to store this metadata. I'm not sure if they're still pursuing that, if they decided to go for another implementation, or if they decided to make it themselves. We'll see what happens. But yeah, I think the last time they're using a library called Beam that IOHK wrote. I believe they're trying to connect to SQLite or something like that. So we'll see if that's what they do in the end, or if they're trying to do something else. Maybe I'm like kind of confusing something. Next up, they're talking about, I think there's one more thing. Okay, it comes right after. Okay, so they're talking about, so further along with the wallet specification, they're still working on the UTXO specification. That's to say, how do you pick the correct UTXO to send, I believe is what they're talking about. So whenever you want to send a transaction, you need to pick which UTXO to send to try and minimize the size of the transaction, or like a few other sets of properties. And you need to be able to do this concurrently if you want performance, all this kind of stuff. So that's still in the works. And so they're working on that. They previously finished a section on rollback invariance, which is to say whenever you need to roll back the blockchain and switch to another branch. Possibly because you were like following the wrong branch because you were disconnected from the network for a few minutes, something like that. And they're trying to write this code in Haskell. So they have the specification, and now they're trying to translate all the invariance and the specification to the Haskell code. And we'll see later on also in more detail the clock formalization of the part 2 of the Cardano specification. So when they wrote the specification, it's like you can imagine like a semi-math paper, and they want to translate in this semi-math paper into like a actual code, right? But they need to make sure that the code they write matches the wallet spec, and they also need to make sure there are no issues in the spec itself. And so that's kind of what they're doing with these formal verifications. Sorry, and also with all this testing. And so that's that. Next, they're talking about data migration. Well, data migration, I'm not sure exactly what this is referring to, unfortunately. But we'll probably see a pull request related to this in the future. Next up, we're talking about using persistent state in the data layer. So this is referring to is, you remember in the previous week, we were talking about them trying to use ACID principles, which is like a database principle, to make sure all the transactions related to the data layer are performed fully, along with another few desirable properties. If you're not too sure what ACID is, just look up on like Wikipedia ACID SQL or ACID database, and you'll find something on the subject, and you can kind of like read the Wikipedia article to get more information. If you don't know what ACID stands for, it's atomicity, consistency, isolation, durability. You can read the exact definition and all these terms on the Wikipedia. I think it's fairly straightforward. You don't need like a technical knowledge really to understand. And for the API rewrite, they're talking about the API is released in a version 1.2. So now if you want to use the V1 API, you can now finally use it. And they're still looking for feedback, so if you try it out and you find any problems or if you have any suggestions, you can always contact RHK about it on either GitHub or through email. And they're just saying they still want to improve the error handling, but we'll see about that. Next up for the networking, we're talking about progress on peer discovery implementation. So this is related to, I believe, they had two things. One is Cadmilia, which is a system for peer-to-peer networks for how to find peers and how to store data on different nodes to gain maximum decentralization. So it's like a very well-known algorithm for decentralized storage. And the other thing they're working on is a subscription status update for how to better subscribe to various nodes to get updates about changing the blockchain. If you want to know more about this part, this all falls into the diffusion layer of the Cardano SL codebase. So if you're interested in this kind of like a networking stuff, you can kind of delve more into that part of the code. But that's what they've been working on. They've been working on a few things in this field, mostly in the hopes of making block syncing and all this kind of stuff faster. And that's what it's about. I think also on the Cardano SL GitHub, another thing about it, there's also a README that explains how the network topology is set up, which helps understand why they need the subscription model and this kind of stuff, and exactly how the subscription model works in various different edge cases. So if you're interested in that, you can go read the README on that. I don't have it right now on me, like it's not in one of my tabs, but I know it's out there, so you can probably go find it. Next up, they're talking about Devops. This is mostly like fixing continuous integration issues from the build. This is like an internal IOHK thing. One thing that's I think was kind of interesting was, let me try and find it. Yeah, so they wanted to have, hold on. Yeah, because they wanted to have that you can launch Daedalus multiple times and not have it cause a problem. So if you're a developer, this has you might have run into this problem where you want to have like Daedalus open on release branch and Daedalus open on like a develop branch or your own custom set of changes, or this kind of stuff, and that didn't used to work. But they've been working on a change such that the port number is now configurable, and Daedalus will launch a new node depending on the configs provided. So I think they're trying to make it so you have two nodes at the same time. And also I think they're doing this to help with the testnet, so you could have Daedalus up with the testnet and Daedalus up with the regular Cardano SL. and this kind of stuff. So that's something that I think developers were looking forward to, and I'm glad that they've been working on this. Other than that, they've been working on the KVM testnet, which has also been released, and I'll show you guys the website in a bit, and also the faucet for the testnet, such that you can now go on the testnet, get some faucet, and try and develop your smart contracts. Next up, they're talking about delegation. So if you saw the post on Twitter by Charles where he had a Cardano update, I think it was about a week ago now. They're talking about what delegation will look like going forward. So they're saying they're trying to target end of Q3 for the staking testnet. They also mentioned that delegation incentives will come in a series of paper. There won't be just one, I believe, is what they said. Which is why there's like two of them listed right here. So they're talking about how mostly the research is not for delegation. They're trying to move forward on the research paper side of things. And they're for the incentive. They've been talking about working on the white paper that is planned to be finished later in this month, and also some design documents and all this kind of stuff. So we'll see a lot of this as the months go by. Won't be done tomorrow. But we'll get good incremental progress as they work on these problems. For Goguen, they've obviously reached the KVM. They're still working on the Yella testnet, which will come, I believe, sometime in July, is the current predicted date. And they're also working on the research side about sidechains, multi-currencies, which is to say, like, if you have like a smart contract layer to handle all these different currencies, and also work across them with like a side chains. Also, for example, like the Cardano CL, the computation layer, will be a different side chain than the Cardano SL settlement layer, and so you need to handle these multi-currencies, and also the chimeric ledger, which is about how to handle both UTXO and account model addresses in a single wallet, because the CL will use the accounting model, whereas the SL will use the UTXO. And so that's kind of what they're saying here. They're just like making progress on all these things. And lastly, they're saying for the testnet, they'll have a series of videos coming up that try and go through how to use this, how it works, how it'll develop in the future. And so we can look forward to these like monthly updates and videos in the future. And then, yeah, they're just saying they have like a testnet readiness checklist. So if you now know what they've gone through and everything went okay, so they've released the testnet. And that's it for the body of this update. So now we're gonna go into a bit more detail with you guys if you are interested. So first off, here's the Cardano testnet webpage. So you can find it at testnet.ioskdev.io. And so they've got a video explaining the testnets, how the testnets will evolve going from here. So if you haven't seen this video, I suggest you go watch it. And from this website, I'll have a link in the description, by the way. So if you don't have a link, you can go to the description on the YouTube site, and you'll see the link to this. So you can download from here. You can also access the faucet. And they also have a custom blockchain explorer just for this KVM testnet, which is different from the Cardano SLR, which is why they need like their own block explorer. For the release, you can now find at daedaluswallets.io the new release of the wallet. If you're wondering why it's 0.10, it's because the version of Daedalus is actually different from the version of the Cardano settlement layer. So Cardano settlement layer is 1.2, but Daedalus is 10.0. So if you're wondering about the difference, this is kind of like how it works. So this is the newest version, and you can go check it out. This is the pull request for the Daedalus 0.10.0 update. So you can check out all the different things that are added, such as async wallet restore, paper wallets, password being on by default, all this kind of good stuff. And also for the mainnet release, they had a few benchmarking tools we saw in the past, the V1 API, which I talked about earlier. Some like stuff for testing a wallet, which is like IOHK internal. Optimizing mempool for the back end, which is nice. A few bug fixes. Database updates for atomic updates in the wallet backend, so as I was talking about before with the ACID principle. And for the API, you can now like sort and filter the results, which is nice to have. And then some like small bug fixes. So this is kind of like the changes. Going to the more of the testnet side, they've been working on the faucet. So they want to have like, I believe there's like the faucet for a testnet for Gogwin, but they also want to have like a testnet, or sorry, a faucet for like a Cardano SL testnet, the Yellow testnet, and also the staking testnet. So all these require faucets. So they're trying to figure out how to like handle all of that in a generic way. And so this is like the faucet from the IOHK ops side, which handles the deployment of the faucet, all this kind of stuff. This was the pull request for the testnet deployment for the KVM. So if you're interested in checking out all these scripts that set up the KVM testnet, so you can find all the Amazon, AWS scripts. You can also find documentation about how to set up testnet. So if for some reason you want to set up your own testnet for whatever reason, you can follow the steps in this pull request to figure out how to do that. And this is the pull request they had to create the installer for the testnet. That's what you see on the testnet website. And you click to install. So that's what they've been working on that side. One thing they've also had is a multi-sig work has started, which is actually really exciting. So for the multi-sig, they had kind of two steps. One is that they kind of have like a way of, like a hacky way of protecting IOHK assets through like a hacky, like a protection on, like hardcore protection on the Cardano SL side. And this is like a temporary solution until they finish this change, which is adding core support for protocol level multi-sig. So this is the feature I think a lot of people have been wanting, especially if you want to have business address for Cardano, or rather for ADA. So this is a great feature that they're working on. On the Rust Cardano side, they've actually moved to a open issue tracking. So now you can see on the Rust Cardano, they have 3 projects they've been working on. So Iridian, which I showed you guys earlier, was the wallet CLI. So it's how to connect to the wallet through a command line interface, which is really exciting. And so now they also have 2 other projects you can go check out. One is Hermes, which is Cardano HTTP bridge, and also Prometheus, which is a common API for the other projects. Similarly, for the Plutus core semantics, this is not really a code update, but somebody asked like how to run the Plutus core code, and so some of the devs like went through and explained like how to go about doing this. So if you're interested in kind of like trying out Plutus yourself in a very like alpha stage, you can kind of follow this issue and see what they did, and try and figure out how to test it out yourself if you're interested. On the Daedalus side, they've been improving their redirecting logic of the network store. So if you don't know what this is like Daedalus is using Electron, which is a way of developing desktop applications using JavaScript. And the way it works internally is it's kind of like a website where you have like routes, and you can handle routing as if it's like a website you're going across. And so they've been working on the redirect logic and all this kind of stuff, along with a few other like small changes, which will not have a direct user change. It will not be too visible, but it's nice to have to like clean up the way this kind of works. One thing they also add is a new UI element for showing which transactions have been used and which ones haven't. So this is like if you ever try to receive ADA, you might have noticed in your wallet there's like a receive address, and every time you use it, that receive address becomes like a hidden in a sense, to promote you to not reuse the same address. Use the different address every time, which is done through a concept called HD wallets. And the previous UI they had was like a decent, and they're trying to like make it better still. So that's kind of what this is changed about. This is a change I talked to you guys about last week, where they're trying to fix the build size by not packing images inside the application itself, because they don't need to, is one thing. They've also been improving the build time, which is also really good, because if you ever try to build and run the test, it actually took, a fair amount of time, not a super long amount of time, so, seconds and minutes, but any improvement is good. This is the change I was talking to you guys in the past, or like earlier in this video, where they're trying to be able to launch the settlement layer from Daedalus, and this will allow them to support stuff like custom ports and all those kind of things, and for you to be able to run multiple Daedalus instances at the same time, which is actually really good. And this is like the 8-hour redemption update that is included in the 1.2 release. So if you ever need to do recovery on your ICO voucher, this is like a new way to do it. On the TLS side, they've been working on the TLS like client check, making sure files are generated properly, and if a file disappears, it'll like become regenerated. And lastly, they've been working on wiring up the generation utility to the installer and all this kind of stuff. So the utility is done, and they're trying to like wire everything together. So that's what's happening on that side. For the wallet spec side, as I mentioned earlier, this is the change for wiring up the pure wallet to the new asset state layer. And this is just like a part of it, so this will be like a multiple part update. So they've been working on that. This is the change for the UTXO Chapter 2 formalization. So this is the one that's using Cox to verify a bunch of different properties of the wallet that is assumed in the spec. So if you're interested in Coq and how it works, you can come check out this file to see how it's being used to formally verify the Chapter 2 of the wallet spec. Lastly, they're fixing a bug related to wallet balance, which was involved when you accidentally put no mnemonic for your wallet password, which apparently is accepted, and this pull request will make that no longer accepted to avoid this bug that some people are running into. Another thing is, as I mentioned before, for the diffusion layer, they have a subscription, the concept is subscribing to get blog updates and all this kind of stuff. And so they found a bug and change I covered previous week, which is where they were moving a bunch of parts of the network layer down to develop. So I think I've covered this like a few months ago, I guess. Like most of the network improvements were done in a specific branch, and now they're trying to move a bunch of that stuff down to develop. And when they're doing that, they introduced a bug which they fixed with this pull request. That bug, by the way, was not introduced in the 1.2 release. This is like not part of the release. Next, they're talking about more stuff in the diffusion layer, improvements in sending raw data, where they accidentally had like a unnecessary deserialization followed by serialization. So there's like a speed improvement for free, basically. And the last thing was kind of interesting. They had a pull request for splitting a block retrieval through streaming, something they've been working on for a long time. And the pull request was randomly closed without any mention as to why it was closed. So I'm not sure like exactly what happened with this change. But it's nice to know that they're still working on this block streaming aspect that they've been working on for a while, and also doing a lot of benchmarks for. One other thing I thought was kind of interesting, so there's a tool called Spell Check, which automatically verifies like whether or not your scripts contain any bugs, and if so, they kind of point out the bugs to you and try and fix them. So I did not use this before, but now they've added Spell Check to both the Cardano SL and Daedalus side to make sure that there are no bugs in any of the scripts that they've been using for like internal testing, all this kind of stuff. Another thing is they've added another endpoint to the API, which is to delete external wallets. So you remember in previous week we saw an API to add external wallets, and now we have the equivalent API to delete external wallets. The pull request is marked as closed. That's just because they took this change and put it in a different branch. But the real change comes from here. So this is good because it means they're working more on the hardware wallets and all this kind of stuff. So it's like nice to see. If you ever want to run benchmarking on your wallet API for whatever reason, this is like mostly an internal IOHK stuff thing. But if you ever want to, there's now like a README that describes how to do this and how to set up and how to interpret the results and all this kind of stuff. So if for some reason you're interested, maybe you're an exchange, you want to make sure that the new wallet API is performant enough, you can run through these steps. And lastly, I just want to mention the DevBlock consolidation. So it's something I covered in the previous video where I was saying they've been trying to reduce the amount of files on disk to store the blockchain, and one then was merging these concepts of blocks and undos into one concept called blunds, and this is kind of what this change is for. And that's it for the video for this week. If you like the video, please consider subscribing. You can also follow me on Twitter, on all the other social media, and hopefully I'll see you guys next week.